Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative. We are looking at Godkiller by Hannah Kanner, or Kaner. I don't know how I'm saying her surname, and I do apologise if I've said it horribly wrong. Now, this is one that had been on my Amazon wishlist since I first saw it come out. And I originally wanted it in hardback, but I was like, do you know what? It's fine because it sounds like it's going to be a series of books, and it's very rare that I do series of books in hardback. I think I've got a series of Unfortunate Events and Harry Potter. I think the rest of my books, if I know it's going to be a series, I will buy in paperback because that gets expensive otherwise. And it was one that intrigued me because obviously I love reading about, ancient gods. I love reading about different, ways of like some cultures have you have the Roman gods, the Norse gods, you have God, but you have loads of different religions, you have loads of different gods. And this follows because it's Kisan, who's the main character, and it goes, as a child, Kisan saw her family murdered by a god. Now gods are forbidden. And it's just one of those where it starts straight out the gate. You've got this little tiny little setup being this perfect little village was worshipping the god of water, and she brought bountiful, lands and everything. But then the god of fire came along, and it is so good. And I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was. And I don't know why I say that, because sometimes I feel like, again, as I've said earlier on my channel, I've said a couple of times, when it's setting up a character, when it's setting up a series, I always feel like the first one is just world building. And because of that, I always feel like some authors fall into the trap of, because they're building up that world, because they're building up, the characters and the backstories and the relationships and all of that, you lose something of the actual story. Now, I didn't feel like this with Godkiller. And so basically it starts off, Kisan she grows up, she becomes a Godkiller because her whole family was murdered to worship this fire god. So then there was this big war where all the humans took out the gods. So she now goes around destroying shrines of gods so that the gods die. And then they'll come back years later, but they won't come back with their memories. And she meets this girl who has a god that's attached itself to her, to the girl. And because of this, she realizes that she can't kill the god because killing the god would kill the girl. She can't kill the girl to kill the god. So they're traveling to this forbidden area where some of the wild gods still go to try and separate the god and the child. And then they meet up on the way because they're pilgrim, they go undercover or whatever. And they meet up with this knight who's going because the king made a deal with the god so he wouldn't die. So he's got a fire as a heart, and so basically this knight, who is a loyal protector of the king because they grew up together, is going on this pilgrimage to try and get his king a new heart. And it's just so good. It's got action, it's got adventure, it's got there's romance, but it's not in your face romance. It's not like they had a steamy bath, and do you know what I mean, because it's still a child present. But it's got each character in their own right has a deep and rich background, and they have the reasons why, and you can understand when someone's doing something. You go, yeah, because of this. Or when Kisan is like, oh, I want to destroy this god but I can't, and so the god doesn't trust her, and then and you're like, oh, I can understand why this god's doing it. By the way, the god's the god of white lies, so the amount of times we've told a white lie. But it's one of those that it just kept me being it just kept me thinking and going. And the fact that the next one, I think it's called Sunbringer, is now out in hardback, and I've got to wait for it to come out in paperback. I'm a little bit gutted that I didn't get the first one in hardback, but I'm very much of, you can see how uniform my shelves are. If I'm getting a series, it has to be and this is why I get really annoyed when halfway through a series they change the book cover design. That really annoys me. I don't know if it annoys anybody else. Let me know if it does. I want to know if I'm just crazy or not. But I honestly can't wait for the second one to come out, because the way this one ended, It's not a standalone book. And I will warn you that now, because sometimes I get annoyed when I'm reading a book and and do you know what I mean? And I don't realise it's part of a series until I've read it and I go, ugh, now I've got to feel like I'm reading the next one. And sometimes I don't want to. But this is not a standalone book. And the ending of this book will link directly into the beginning of the next book. And I'm telling you that now so that you don't start this book and then go, huh, well, what happens? But it still ends well, so that you can kind of take a breath and wait for the next one. But I would definitely recommend it. It gets a 5 out of 5 from me. It was such an enjoyable book. I would definitely read it again. I'm really glad I got paperback, because I do want the second one in the series at least. And it'd be interesting to see how many of them there are. But you know, if you agree or disagree with what I've said, if you've read it and it wasn't a huge fan and you weren't a huge fan of it, if you've read this and you know of a book similar to this, you know, let me know. I'm always open to recommendations, but definitely go out and read this if you can. But remember to always keep it contento.